Hey, this is Father Chris from Cool Hip Priest, and you are listening to The Wild Man and Steve.
You are about to listen to the intersection of faith, talk, and music. The Wild Man and Steve show starts right now.
So, Steve, I have a question for you, as I always do before we introduce our guest. You know, we always do this little powwow thing for a few minutes as we start the show. So we've been doing this show now. We are going up. We are coming close now to 2 years. 2 years.
2 years, baby.
2 years. And we're talking weekly episodes, right? Weekly episodes, 2 years. So I have a question for you. Okay, so basically, this is 2 years Steve Perkins has spent with the Wild Man. Okay, 2 years. My question for you is this. Are you any wilder than how you were when you started?
You know, before we started this, I think if it came to the wild meter, I would probably have rated somewhere around middle school librarian. Now I make Ozzy Osbourne look like your grandma. Okay, that's how wild I am after spending 2 years with you.
Well, and you know what? People don't get this, but before I met you and we started this show, I was a gentleman. I was. I mean, all this sarcasm, all this busting on each other, you bring that out of me, right? Before I was, people don't even recognize who I am now after 2 years.
It's a little service I provide.
Yes. So isn't it amazing how we have completely changed each other's personalities in just 2 years' time, right?
It is. Yeah.
I mean, I took you from being a middle school librarian, which, man, my goodness, how do you fit that stereotype? A middle school librarian. That's quite a stretch there. Anyway, that was the opening for the show, ladies and gentlemen. And we're always doing this test every time we open a show. We want to hear from you. Tweet us at Wildman and Steve, hashtag Wildman and Steve. Rate the opening of the show because we are trying to find the number one way to open up a podcast, number one way to open up a show. That was another attempt at that. And Steve, I think we're getting closer to the perfect one. We're getting closer. We're
always
getting
closer.
Yes.
Never attaining, but always closer.
The carrot is right in front of our face. This is when you're going to reach out and grab it. So as our listeners know, now is the part of the show where I turn it over to Latin teacher, rock and metal enthusiast, Steve Perkins himself, who I have entitled as Mr. Segue, who always gives us a great segue to introduce our amazing guests. And tonight we have an amazing guest. So, Mr. Segue, take it away.
You know what's really brought us together, Wildman, is you were talking about those 2 years and what has transformed your personality, what's transformed my personality, our being together. You realize what has brought us together? It's the Jesus music. Mm-hmm. It's the Jesus music, man. I think from the fans to the artists, to the graphics and stuff that we tweet out, the stuff we put on our blog, it has all been about the Jesus music.
The Jesus music.
The Jesus music.
The Jesus music. Yes. And you know what? What's amazing about that kind of rings a bell. I don't know. Was there a movie? Was there a movie that
if not, somebody needs to do one.
It'd be great. It'll work, I promise.
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, with us tonight, as we are so honored to have producer Josh Walsh, producer of the Jesus Music movie. Josh, how are you doing today? Welcome to the program.
I'm doing great. Thank you, guys. I love the open, by the way. I hope it really works for you. It's great. And the Jesus music, yes, that is what brings us all together today. I'm just a fan of Christian music, like I'm sure the people that are listening to your show, and like you guys. I love your shirt, Steve. That's fantastic. I need to know where to buy that. I just love all the Striper swag. It's fantastic. But yeah, Josh Walsh, I'm a producer on the film that is currently in theaters, on its third week in theaters, The Jesus Music, which is an anthology of kind of Christian contemporary, or the Jesus music, which I would refer to it more as, because we cover more of a scope than just contemporary Christian music. But the formation of this kind of Jesus music in the 60s and 70s to present, and we cover all sorts of ground of all sorts of artists. We talk about Striper. We interviewed Michael Sweet, and down to Michael W. Smith and Matt Redman, and we go all over the kind of the spectrum of really trying to answer the question, what is Jesus music and what's the story behind it?
We're going to be getting into that tonight with the Jesus movie. Before we get there, just for you personally, I'm kind of curious, because as I was looking over my show notes, let's put it that way, Steve, right? With your bio and understanding your background of getting involved with the Earl Brothers and the I Can Only Imagine movie and so forth, from a standpoint of a Christian music fan, what was it that got you into producing and into filmmaking?
Yeah, I think it's the stories, to me, it's all about the story. For me, I started about 10 years ago. I'm actually pretty young for being in the entertainment business and for producing. I started working with these guys, John and Andy Irwin, who actually shot music videos, was their thing they did prior to doing feature films and stuff. And I just felt like, man, I love the process of telling a story. And like we say in the doc, a song is a 3-minute story, or longer or shorter. So I think just stories have drawn me in. And I just thought, man, we have such great stories of faith and stories that can encourage people and inspire people. I want to see more stuff like that. And so I've always been interested in that, even from a really young age. I wanted to work in film. I thought it was an interesting journey for us. We had made a lot of movies, but our big movie that really broke out was a musical story. The tagline was "The song you know, the story you don't." So that's kind of been a mantra for me over these last 2 years. I grew up listening to 70s music, actually, which is kind of funny. My parents were not big CCM fans, but they were Jesus music 70s fans. So I kind of love that, because I got exposed to bands like Res Band and Second Chapter of Acts and Keith Green and, Barry McGuire and, all those guys I listened to as a kid, and I loved their music, and I still do. And Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill and Phil Keaggy, and all those guys were like kind of what my parents still liked about kind of Jesus music. And they didn't really listen to it kind of starting in the 80s on, or kind of mid 80s on. So I missed the Striper, I missed all that. I wasn't alive, so I missed it by a long shot. But I missed it through my parents, where a lot of people listen through music. So during the pandemic, our production company got shut down. We had just released another film about a song and a musician called I Still Believe, about the musician Jeremy Camp. And I was sitting down watching a documentary about another subject of music. And I just thought, man, I was raised and hearing these stories about Keith Green and how radical he was, and listening to his music and about all these pioneers in the 70s. And I was doing research for a feature film that we're going to be producing called Jesus Revolution, about that whole time in the 60s and the 70s and what was going on, and then the birth of Calvary Chapel and the music that came out of that. And then we've done 2 movies on contemporary Christian singers. And I just thought, man, why has no one ever told this story? And I wonder if there is a story there. That's always kind of how you start, right? It's like, I think there's something there, Yeah. So I felt like I had this unique perspective where I knew a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. And I just thought, man, I bet it all connects. You could fight for days on like, this subject is such a hard thing to like tackle, because it's so big and there's so many areas you could go, and there's a lot of division within it, even about what is Jesus music and what's the best kind of music. And we kind of cover that in our documentary. But I just thought we should start somewhere. And what I felt like we should start is, I think the through line of all this music, I told this to someone the other day, Glenn Kaiser, we were on a podcast together and we were talking about this. And someone asked me, why did you call it Jesus music? Because, the Jesus music was really the 70s and you span all the way to the current day. And my response to that was, every musician I interviewed, I believe the best version of what they're trying to do is Jesus music. Like ultimately it's Jesus music. That's this business, these artists on their best day with the right heart, with the right motives. It's singing about Jesus. That's what differentiates it from 1,000 years of hymns and things. This was a different twist in it. Like it was a different approach. And I love the hymns and I love all that, but Jesus music was a different thing. It was birthed out of the 60s and 70s, out of a movement, out of a counterculture to the counterculture. So, I just thought, man, why can't we tell that story and all that? And, I think ultimately when you watch the doc, you get that. You go, you know what? Jesus music can be Stryper. Jesus music can be love song. Jesus music can be Mercy Me. I don't think anybody particularly loves the label, the contemporary Christian music label, because they feel like that kind of represents maybe the bubble or the box and the business side of it that kind of commercializes away the art and commercializes the way the heart of the music and the mission and the ministry. So that's why we avoided that terminology and we went with Jesus music is the purest form of this. And it's not always done with that, and the people fail. But at the end of the day, I think that's most of the artists we interviewed. I think that was their heart, was to make Jesus music.
But a lot of hymns are close your eyes singing to God. I wanted to sing with my eyes wide open, singing to each other.
This thing, Jesus music, found its way in my hometown, and it changed my life.
When it comes to music and how we can express ourselves, we don't have to do it the way it was done before.
You want to find a loving way to have these conversations.
My generation had seen all of the civil unrest. Most of us were trying to escape the pain and the misery.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, in fact, if you guys had called it the contemporary Christian music movie, I know you would not have gotten Michael Sweet to sit down for an interview. This is one example because
he's not even in that business. He's never been on a Christian contemporary label. He's never.
Absolutely. And he said so many times that's not what they are. They're a bunch of Christians who play metal. And I will say the film is fantastic. My son and I saw it just a few days ago, and my son's a junior in college. He is a huge For King and Country fan.
Yes.
And so when we saw the trailer, I saw the trailer, and I think I sent it to him of Joel Smallbone talking about it, and of course their connection was Stryper, which is my
awesome,
era.
right? Come on,
we were so excited, so we got to go see that together. And I will tell you, as the film was going on, I kept pulling out my phone. I tried to turn down the brightness so I wouldn't distract other people, but I'm pulling out my phone and I'm making notes because the very next day I put up the blog post on our website, wildmanandsteve.com, about the film. I think you do such a great job of really two things. You've got it chronologically, all right? There's a timeline, as you said, starts 60s and 70s, goes through today, but then you've also got these themes that are going throughout the film as well. And you think about the on fire, just abandon, evangelism, the evangelistic spirit of the 70s and that. Then there's the business side of it, you got the CCM label and that sort of stuff, 80s, 90s. And in fact, you guys also touch on things like racial healing and some of the issues with even from within the body of Christ, people reacting perhaps negatively towards some of the artists, whether it's their music or things they did in their life. So I think you guys really cover a lot. But as we know, any historian, and that's basically what you are, you guys are historians, you're telling history. You have to pick and choose your material.
It's like picking and choosing children, though. It
is, right?
So hard.
So how did you guys go about, not only from the tons of artists.
We shot 100 artists, by the way.
Which again, you got in so much. And I will say, if anybody's upset because my favorite artist isn't in there, seriously, knock that off. Because the guy, it's a 2-hour movie. I mean, you can only do so much. You guys.
That's my pushback. It's funny. Glenn Kaiser let me off the hook with that. He said, "You know what, guys? If you want to make the documentary, go make it. These guys made it." And I was like, "Oh, I guess that makes me feel good if Glenn Kaiser says that."
But how did you guys choose not just the artist per se, but the stories and how you wanted to go about presenting?
So that was what was tough. So originally we set out, and we hope to still do, a series. So a 6-part miniseries where we get to spend an hour in each decade. That's the hope. We shot 100 interviews. We probably shot 1,000 hours worth of footage. I mean, it's crazy. We have in-depth, amazing interviews with Phil Kagi, with Love Song, that we couldn't get into because you only have 2 hours. So in a feature format, you have the thematic kind of storytelling that you have to do. So I think we kind of sat down, and this went through many iterations and a lot of people speaking into it. But we definitely said, who do we need to include? How do we include more people? Because we really tried. And if you notice those vices of like the albums and the people sitting down, so you could show the scope of research we had kind of done in those decades. Really, we had to tell the story, the overall story of Jesus music, and that had to be the vice that kept driving it. So how do we keep driving this along? And beyond that, we wanted to say what artists at least embodied the spirit of that decade, right? So the 80s, there's so many amazing artists in the 80s, and we could have gone down the Petra story route, which would have been, they were a hugely important band to Christian music, right? But we decided we need to be able to, no one will watch that documentary, the documentary that's 6 hours long. We have to be able to condense it. So what in the 70s, we have the birth of something, the purity of it, and the characters and all the dynamics of what starts a movement. So we decided, okay, who are we going to focus on there? Love Song, it's like the Beach Boys of Christian music. They embodied that time. They were the guys that came out of Calvary Chapel and knew Greg, and they were alive, and both of them gave us the interview, and it was perfect. So we decided, okay, we're going to start with them as the foundation of starting, and then we're going to talk about, hey, there's a complicated characters in this, so we're going to focus on Larry. I would have loved to have gotten into Randy Stonehill's storyline. The problem is we would have had to gone into the rift between Larry and Randy, and that would have been a whole tangent, and it would have gone down a road. We talked to Randy about doing interviews. We wanted to get his interview for the series. There's so much there though, and that would have taken the documentary off course. So the thought was, okay, talk about Larry being this pioneer, and then then mention these crucial guys like Andre Crouch and second chapter of Acts, and kind of just cover that ground, but go deep with a few. That was kind of the thought. That embodies the 70s. And then how do we get onto the next part of the story thematically and also chronologically? That was a battle. That was really hard to say, let's make it correct in the history as much as we can, but also tell an entertaining story. So if you think of the beginning was like this founding, this movement was born. It needed something that was like the crucible that would like, is this going to work? And what was the challenge to that? And the challenge really, when we dug, it was a lot of things, right? But one of the major challenges early on did seem to be the pushback from, this is new, this is dangerous, this is scary. What is this? And we needed someone, we didn't want to pick on anybody, and we didn't want to be jerks, and we didn't want, so we needed, there was a lot of characters who kind of came out against CCM, but there was one that I think was safe to kind of just put in that position and say, all right, this was, and we didn't alter what he said. We didn't modify what he said. It's still on his website. We just said, all right, this was Jimmy Swaggart's opinion at this time. And by the way, we didn't go, like, we felt like it would be hypocritical because of the fact later on in the doc, we talk about artists' failings and how they're judged. It'd be kind of hypocritical to say, it's terrible these guys judged everyone, and then we judged the guy that judged. We just kind of put his words out there. We didn't go, and Jimmy Swaggart went on to be synonymous with scandal, right? We just put his words in there. We let them stand on its own. And, hopefully the audience would know who he was, and it would kind of make sense. And they go, oh, okay. So that's why we chose that storyline. And we said, okay, where's the compelling stories in this whole doc? And that was a compelling story, to think that this guy led them to Christ and then condemned them on public television, wrote about them in books. And so that was just such an interesting story. We thought, okay, let's dig into that in the 80s. And that will be kind of, and then, of course, Amy Grant chronologically came around the same, but prior to them, but thematically and in the story, I felt like you could break a little bit of some stuff to tell a good story. And thematically, the spirit of that time was there was a lot of like, what is this? And there was a lot of pushback. And then at some point, Amy kind of came around to becoming this character that was so big, and it was easier for the church to swallow and for people to kind of get along with and go, okay, that's not so dangerous seeming. Stryper, I mean, if they came out today, we'd all be a little bit like, what is this? I think, because this just was so different, right? And I love them. But that was kind of the thinking. It's like, how do we tell the story thematically rather than just going chronologically? Because funny enough, people would be bored if it was just like, and then this happened, and this happened. So we really looked, where is there really compelling stories, and how does that fit to the arc of storytelling that's typically feature films, which is, you have these, hero's journey kind of stuff that happens, and the hero's journey is the hero's Jesus music, and it had to go through all these iterations. And so that was the kind of the mechanism we used, and it was painful to do. And there was sequences that I would have loved that to have made it to the final film that didn't make it to the final film. We just released a clip on social media, if you haven't seen it, that is one of the most painful things we lost in the film, which was the sequence about Eddie DeGarmo meeting John Cooper when John Cooper was a kid. And I mean, this guy literally, like a grandfather, came to him at a concert and said, "I don't like your music. I preach against it. But my kid loves it, and his mom just died, who's my daughter. And it would mean a lot to him if you would speak to him, because he's kind of going through a crisis right now." And so Eddie was like, "I'll do it." And he got on his Harley, and they all lived in, I guess they were down there in Memphis or whatever where they lived. And so he got on his Harley, he drove to the kid's house and knocked on his door. Kid answered the door and said, why didn't God heal my mother? That was his first thing he said to him, this like 11-year-old kid. And of course, Eddie, in this interview, he said, God just kind of gave me the words, and he just said, who told you God didn't heal your mother? You just didn't see it, and then the kid let him in, and he got to minister to him. And that was Eddie DeGarmo talking to John Cooper. Yeah. And then 20 years later or something like that, I don't know if it's the exact amount of years, unknowingly, Eddie helps him sign Skillet. He didn't know it was that kid. It didn't come out till later. He just heard this band, says, this is great, brought it to his friend Dana Key, of course, DeGarmo and Key, who was at the time, I think, at Benson, and said, hey, there's this band, this hard rock band, they're really great. I think you should take a risk on them. And they do it. And then later it comes out that John Cooper tells him, like, you came to my house. And he went, you're that kid. Holy cow.
Oh, my word.
Right? I never heard that story, so just incredible to think about. And to this day, John Cooper, I love John Cooper. He loves, I mean, when he did this doc, we texted him about it, and he said, you know what, I'll do it because nobody honors these guys that came before. So he did it because he wanted to honor those guys. And he's friends to this day with Michael Sweet and Eddie DeGarmo and John Chilton, all these guys that are these legends, and he honors them and always takes time to honor them. So I just love that guy. I met him a couple times. We interviewed him, and I'm probably a bigger fan than I am a friend of his. So, so I tried to be cool when we were interviewing him, but I just loved that story. And I thought, man, what an incredible story, and it didn't make it to the doc. So do you think that story didn't make it to the doc? How many stories, didn't, make it that are just amazing?
Please tell us that there's going to be bonus features on the Blu-ray when this comes out.
There is bonus features. All that is not necessarily included because there was not a lot of time, getting it out. But it's gonna get out there. I promise. We have this footage. I've seen a lot of people posting like, just put it online for free. I'm like, I'm not sure investors would love that, but I think that this was enough of a spark that people, the interest that there's a larger story. And I really do hope we get to do a series on it because it deserves it. There's so many storylines. Keith Green is a hero of mine. And the fact that we didn't get in a little bit of more of Keith's story, we interviewed Melody. It's a great interview. We just didn't have time to get into all Keith's things because we had to get to the 80s, and Keith really is end of 70s into the 80s, and that's when he dies in 82, I believe. So, and what an amazing story there.
You feel like something's in the wind.
This soundtrack emerges.
They had no idea they were helping to create an entire industry.
I saw contemporary Christian music born right before my very eyes.
You don't know you're a pioneer or something when you're doing it.
We were just doing what we love.
You had grunge, and you had pop, and you had rock, and you had hip hop.
There was so much great music going on. Everything felt so fresh and new.
What we were doing said so much across the world.
It was so much drama in the church.
Every setback there would be a glimmer of hope.
Money, cultural influence, off the chart.
It's bigger than any one person or one artist.
Offers people a sense of hope.
Yeah, there was tension on DC Talk.
Here's the deal.
So tell us, our listeners would probably be interested as well. How long did it take to accomplish this movie? Like from start
quicker than it should have. Quicker than it should have. Because docs, I mean, like when Ken Burns did country music, I think he took like 5 years, and I get it now why he did, because there's so much you have to do. So this was like a crash course in history, archival. It was a lot. We did it. We started it in May. March, April, May. Yeah, May. We started filming end of April of 2020, and we was on screen, this month. So it was a really quick turnaround. We hustled. We shot 100 interviews in like 2 months, which is crazy if you think about it. We just were shooting, and we shot multiples a day. We went all over the place. We shot Bill and Gloria Gaither in Indiana. We shot, we just went all over the place. We just did not rest during 2020. And then we were, doing the research parallel to it. I was reading every book that was ever written on Christian music and talking to every nerd about it and watching the interviews. And so there was this process of like reading, watching, listening, to get the history. And then probably almost a year of editorial where we just sat there trying to figure out how do we make, 500-600 hours worth of footage into a 2-hour doc. Because we just felt like, we had shopped it around, and a lot of like kind of like this music gets, a lot of people were kind of like, that's interesting. Yeah. Like they get all the big names, but I don't know if, I don't know. Is there a big enough audience for it? Are they there? Should we care? And we just said, yeah, we believe you should. So we kind of did it. We did it ourselves. We raised the money to make it ourselves and to release it ourselves. And then we did a deal to distribute it with Lionsgate, who we work with on our other films. And so they took a risk to distribute it, but really we had to take a lot of the risk to make the thing and get it out there, because we really felt like the fans of this genre, whatever the genre is, or this movement or this kind of music, deserve their story to be told. So that was why.
Well, it's definitely exciting to see that this is even out there. And as Steve would say, that it's on the big screen, because, you hit on an era that Steve and I come from, that in our high school days, which was when it was really big in the 80s. Christian contemporary music was really big. Christian rock started in, Stryper, Petra, you mentioned Amy Grant, Phil Keaggy, all of those guys that were controversial because the church wouldn't accept it. And we've interviewed several of them on this show.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we have heard so many stories, and so many of them have the same theme, that they were really being attacked by the church. And for them to pursue during that time was really showing a lot of courage on their part, that they were doing this for God and not for themselves.
Yeah.
But what the one question I would have for you is, in all the research that you did, you've already alluded to a lot of this.
Yes.
Is there maybe one message that you go away with from this movie, that you take away, that says, this was the most powerful part that really touched me during this time?
Yeah, there was a lot of stories and messages that kind of, to me, touched my life, when I was watching it, and making it. I think the overarching theme that I think is the theme of music and artists throughout the Bible and through history is that God uses broken people to reach broken people. Because I think, and we could touch on that in our doc, we tend to put people on a pedestal, but you go back to David, the psalmist, the songwriter, the artist, pretty flawed guy, and he was called out, he had a heart after God, so I think, sometimes in the modern era, it's a little harder to differentiate that in kind of in the cancel world that we kind of live in. It's hard to say, and I'm saying that on ourselves as the church. Sometimes we just, someone screws up or something goes wrong and they're gone, or we're so disappointed, but we put too much faith in them, and and that can be a problem sometimes because we idolize them. One of the unique challenges that these guys have that participate in music and art, that's different than their counterparts in kind of secular music, in secular music, that there's always tension between business and art, right? In Christian music, there's business, art, and ministry.
Right.
So if you screw up in your personal life when you're a pop singer, you probably sell more records. In the Christian music business, sometimes you can get thrown out. And I think as Christians, we talked about this. We weren't able to get into this as much on the thing. We are called to a higher standard. So I'm not saying everyone should get a free pass, but we should model forgiveness. We should model how to love each other, right? We'll know they are Christians by their love, right? That was a 70s mantra, So I think that probably, to me, like watching these guys talk about their lives, and I think a lot of people go, I couldn't empathize with them until I heard their story, and then when I see it, I go, okay, I get it. Maybe I was a little harsher, So yeah, that's what I would say. God uses these really broken, screwed up people just like us, to write these really interesting songs that reach people in a really profound way for God. And it's not a new story, honestly. I'm doing a lot of research now, even on the history of the hymns. It's very similar. In our interview with Bill Gaither, he talked about Martin Luther, how he was kind of ridiculed when he put together "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." So there was a lot of pushback, and there was a lot of tension there for that. So this isn't a new story. It's just we don't really tell a lot of our stories, and so we don't know. So that's part of my heart, is to tell these stories so that people will know. And that's been a real reward for me. Two things. You mentioned something, Steve, that I thought was great. The idea of you and your son going to watch it makes me so happy, because the whole idea of this, I had hoped, is that they would bring generations together. People, your kids might go to watch, for King Country and Lauren Daigle and Skillet or something, and then you're there for Stryper Petra and Larry Norman or something. It's just cool to bring those generations together. And that was one of our heart behind this project, was unity, to unify. We weren't trying to attack the church. We weren't trying to attack artists. We were just trying to tell the story, and hopefully it would be unifying. That's why, we show a pastor who had bad character, but we also show 3 pastors who have good character. Billy Graham, Greg Laurie, and Giglio from Passion City. So it's like those are guys modeled out what they preached. So yeah, for one bad kind of egg, we did show good ones too that got behind it. Chuck Smith and Lonnie and all those guys. It was like we didn't want to so condemn the church and make them the enemy. The church is the answer, but we also can be kind of the enemy sometimes.
No, it was fair. It was certainly not. At no point was it a kiss and tell kind of thing. At no point was it a bash.
Yeah.
Let me bless you with something else. I got a text. It was today. From a dear brother in Christ, a guy named Paul, lives up around Chicago. And I just wanted to read you the text that he sent me and a couple other guys. Saw Jesus music last night. Got me all choked up. I just wanted to go somewhere alone after the movie and worship. I was a wreck, not sure why. I guess it was just seeing how God continually uses imperfect people to advance his kingdom.
That's it.
And then he goes on, and he talks about his wife, Paul's wife, who works with senior citizens.
Yep.
He said, whose minds very often are deteriorated to the point, they might not remember their name, but when she starts to sing songs with them, they can sing along word for word. And so the power of the music, and I got to tell you,
different part of your brain. It's a whole other part of your brain that memorizes music versus words. So it's amazing.
Absolutely.
Let's not forget, music is God's idea.
I think music is the most powerful universal language in the world.
Music was a lifeline.
It became part of the fabric of who I was.
It pushed me to do some courageous things.
It touches the soul like somebody talking to you can't. And you can do all of that in 3.5 minutes.
So you talked about the possibility maybe of doing a series or a multi-part series. Is there anything far enough along in the works on that? Are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we did some of the hardest work, which is to get the interviews, which I don't know if we would have ever been able to get those interviews if it wasn't for 2020. Because if you think about it, these musicians even now are so busy, it's impossible to get on their schedules, and it's not because they don't care. It's just they're so busy. So, that was a monumental task, and that's why it didn't make the most financial sense at first when we didn't know if this was going to be a feature or a series to just shoot 100 interviews. But we thought, this is like a time capsule. We've just got to get them. So we went out and we got all this, as many as we could shoot. I regretted that we missed Carmen. He died before we were done filming. I was like, stink. We should have maybe we should have prioritized that because he's a fascinating character. But yeah, no, it's there, and the teams behind it are very passionate about doing it. So, do
you think you have an outlet for it?
I think so. I think when this comes out and more people see it, we had a theatrical run that's been pretty successful so far for a documentary. Documentaries aren't the go-to experience typically of films and theaters. So the fact that we've made so much noise in theaters, I think Hollywood pays attention to that. Yeah. So we come out on DVD in December. And I think that will also help, so I think we'll actually really over-index on home entertainment, because I think there's still a little bit of fear of going back to theaters and stuff that people need to get over, well, I don't know if they need to get over it. I will say they need to get over it because we're in the movie business, but everyone needs to make those decisions on their own. But, so I think there's a bit of that where those windows that follow, I think you're going to see a lot of interest even there. And so I think that demand will be a catalyst for us to go to streamers or and really sell a series.
Jesus did for me. 'Cause I'll rise again. He's alive. Without a doubt, I've had my doubt. When the Lord starts him, that'll be it. But who never thought I'd be a rock and roll preacher? That we can be born again. We can be together for now and forever. I love you.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to give you a label. And
please.
You can keep this label if you want, but I'm going to say Josh Walsh, the expert on Jesus music. And the reason I'm saying expert is because you obviously have done the research, you've studied this, and you've even brought up things that even Steve and I, who grew up in the era, aren't even aware of, So you definitely are an expert. So with that being said, I have another question for you.
Hopefully I can answer it now. I feel like I've been up on a pedestal. So,
Mr.
Yes.
Expert, based upon your research, you are talking to two guys who love Jesus music.
Yes.
And we have listeners who are listening right now to our show that's why they're listening. Where do you see the future of Jesus music going?
I love that. Yeah. When we asked that question, actually, of a lot of the people we interviewed, so I kind of got a collective answer from them. I think it's interesting if you think about how it started. It started very without a plan, without a formula. It was just artists springing up, and there was so much originality. And it went so many places because it was so brand new, right? And this is kind of the business that sometimes can get around art, right? I think sometimes it can get around art and it can package it and it can get the business working, which is a two-edged sword. It's really, if you look at if you talk to the artist, in one way it's come on, these guys got to have to support their families and they got to have a living, and they can't do more art if they don't sell more albums. And it's not to condemn one or the other, really. It's just to say that's part of sometimes that process. I think, though, and this is what I hope with the Jesus music can be a catalyst to, I think that we got to get back to the purity of the Jesus music of the 1970s, because I think there was such a ministry perspective and such a heart behind, people were going, if you read Keith Green's story, he, when he decided, he was a Christian when he decided to switch from playing secular music to Christian music. He went, you know what? It was like a heart thing for him. He's like, I'm just going to give it to God. I'm going to go start singing Christian music. and I'm going to be poor for the rest of my life. And you know what? I just love Jesus and I want to tell people about him because he changed my life. And then all of a sudden he was actually kind of almost angry and shocked and confused by the success he had in contemporary, in the business side, because he was like, what am I doing? And then he gave him away and stuff. And everyone knows that kind of story. I think we got to get back to that, because we are we have the answer. We have this hope, and people can see it and they can hear it, and it can change lives. And I think, I think everybody that's in, a lot of the people in this business ultimately want that, but I think that we need to be more bold with it. I think we have to, I think we just got to get back to the heart of why we're doing this, and I think some people are getting that. So I think if it's going to survive, because, it's always in any entertainment venture, you're always talking about how do we get that younger generation. I think the younger generation is looking for authenticity. And if you look at the authenticity of the 70s and when these guys coming off this hippie stuff where it's just not working for them, all the sex and drugs and rock and roll, and we talked about that in the doc, it just wasn't working for them. It was leaving them like drugged out, empty, sad, and it was promising everything. I think in some ways we're 50 years from that now, which is so interesting. We're 50 years from Expo 72, which is kind of crazy. I think in some ways that's, a lot of guys that study movements of God, they say it happens in that kind of increment. I think you're dealing with a generation of young people now that are similar in some weird way to the generation of the 60s, and we're being promised a lot of things, if it's social media or for whatever it is, that are leaving us pretty empty. I've heard a lot of really negative stats about suicide and depression amongst really young kids, which is so strange, because you don't even have, at that point in your life, how are you so depressed, but I think it's this environment, so I think that, I tell people this, that ask me about it, that, some that are not fans of it, some that are, is it real? Do they, is it, I don't know if Christian music is the answer. I don't think Christian music is the answer. And I'm saying that as a guy that did Jesus music. I think the gospel is ultimately the answer. And if we're singing about it, that's going to resonate with people. And if we're writing about it, it's going to resonate with people. We're making movies about it, it's probably going to resonate with people because it's not us, it's the power of the gospel. So I think if we can get back to that, then I think we are in some ways. I see artists starting to do that. And I think that it doesn't always make business sense, but I think it makes sense if for people's lives, and I think they're craving that right now. And
I listen, I will show you my text. This brother Paul that I was talking about, who loved the movie, this is what I responded to him. This was earlier today. I said, I was most struck by the early part focusing on the Jesus movement of the 70s, things like Expo 72 and so forth. It was vibrant, creative, no doubt with its share of mistakes, but just people who wanted to share Jesus any way they could. We need that again. That was my text this morning to my friend. And I think, one of the things we tend to, Wildman and I, we tend to run in more of the hard rock and heavy metal circles, although we certainly have had guest artists from other genres of Christian music. But tell me what you think. Am I right or am I wrong about this, Wildman? Some of the up and coming hard rock and metal artists, I think, are really doing that. And that's not to say that it's not happening in some of the other genres as well. Just that's
they're very overt in hard rock, which is so funny. They got to be some of the straightest shooters. They become territory.
That's it. They're straight shooters. And I'm thinking of a band that's now got 2-3 albums out, a band called Chaotic Resemblance. They're out of Oklahoma. And these guys have been doing stuff with Les Carlson from Bloodgood. They've been doing stuff with Oz Fox from Stryper. Mm-hmm. And Chaotic, these guys work construction jobs.
Yes.
Okay. They work construction jobs. Mm-hmm. And during a concert, I want to tell you something, they rock as hard as anybody you've ever seen. And their lead singer, Travis McConnell, he likes nothing more than at some point in the concert, he brings out his big old fat Bible and usually starts preaching to people.
I know.
And I'm going, that's what it was back in the day. And these guys are really getting that. So I think you're right. I think there's a hunger for it. I do think there are artists that are feeding that hunger, that are doing that because they know what people really need is Jesus. Yeah. And some people choose to communicate that through music.
That's it. That is my thesis on it all. And if there are fakers in there, where is there not? Where is there not fakers? And how many pastors, how many business people, how many authors that fall, that's, you'll know they're Christians by their fruit, and ultimately you can't write off an entire genre, because you don't like it, and because one person failed, and you go, okay, see, that's the we're only as powerful as the message we're preaching. So
you and you alone are worthy. There's only one king who sits on the throne. There's only one lamb who's worthy to open the scroll. Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God.
I could talk to you guys all night. I do got to run to something eventually, but man, I loved my conversation with you guys. We should do this all the time. I'm like, I'm loving it.
Yeah, we want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. Before you go, there's just one thing I wanted to mention, is that you may have not received word about this, but recently the Wild Man and Steve show expanded into an authentic Wild Man and Steve University. So we have a presentation for you. Okay,
perfect.
Go ahead, Steve.
Josh, having graduated now from Wild Man and Steve University, we would like to present you with the doctorate of wild musical stylings, my friend.
I love it, and the great thing about it is I have a lot of education. So this. I'll put this on my resume. This is fantastic.
There you go.
we will get the diploma to you. Trust me on that.
I want it.
Well, hey, thank you very much, sir. We really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you guys.
It was an honor to interview Josh Walsh, producer of the Jesus Music movie. Incredible movie and incredible man, and you can tell from this interview he did so much research to find out what the truth was with all of the history of the Jesus music, starting with the 60s, 70s era and moving all the way up until today. However, at the same time, one statement he made towards the end of the interview, which was so powerful, was when he said that Christian music or Jesus music isn't what's going to work. That isn't what's going to save us. It's the gospel message that is going to save us. But he said, however, if the Jesus music contains the gospel, then that is what God is going to use to bring others to him. The gospel is the most important thing. Whether you do it through music, whether you do it through relationship, whether you do it through preaching, the gospel is the most important thing. John 3:16, probably the most popular verse in the entire history of the church. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. It is all about the gospel, folks, and that is what here at the Wild Man and Steve show, that's all we are about, is what we can do to connect artists with fans, fans with artists, and to connect everybody with Jesus, but with all for the purpose of spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. The Wild Man and Steve show is now partnering with New Release Today. Find out more about them at newreleasetoday.com. And don't forget to check out our website, where you can also leave us a review at wildmanandsteve.com.